So, why are we going back to the moon? I mean, really, after a 50-year break, what's the big rush all of a sudden? Is it just for the science? For the spirit of exploration? Well, we're going to dig into the real motivations, both back then and right now. And you'll see that humanity's greatest achievements, well, they're almost always tied to some good old-fashioned earthly rivalries. This is the story we always hear about the Apollo program. It's this really romantic, inspiring idea that we went to the moon just because it was there, the next great frontier. It was just this pure human desire to explore. And hey, it sounds great, doesn't it? Yeah, but that's not really it. The hard truth is, inspiration and big ideas don't get the checks written in Washington. The desire to explore might be baked into who we are, but it takes something way more urgent, way more primal, to get Congress to fund one of the most expensive projects in human history. The real reason wasn't about looking up at the stars, it was about looking over our shoulder at a rival. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we're going to tear apart that explorer myth. Then we'll get into the real driver of the first space race, beating the Soviets. We'll look at the super long pause that came after, the brand new race that's heating up right now, and finally, the incredible prize everyone is scrambling for this time around. So yeah, let's tackle that myth head on. Look, the passion for science and discovery is absolutely real, no doubt. But that's not what convinces politicians to spend billions and billions of dollars. For that, you need something bigger. You need an enemy. And back in the 1960s, America had a very, very clear adversary. The real catalyst for the Apollo program wasn't some noble dream. It was the Cold War, plain and simple. You have to remember, in the early days of the space race, the United States was getting absolutely hammered. The Soviets launched Sputnik, the first satellite. They sent Laika, the first animal, into orbit. And then, the big one. They put Yuri Gagarin, the first human, into space. Every single one of these was seen as a huge victory for communism, and the pressure in Washington was becoming unbearable. And this right here, this just lays it all out perfectly. Just 6 weeks after Gagarin circled the Earth, President Kennedy stood up in front of Congress. He didn't just propose a moon mission, he framed it as an epic battle. He set up an enemy and defined the mission as a flat-out necessity in the global fight against tyranny. Now that's how you get the funding. So what happened after Apollo 11 stuck the landing? Well, we got to the moon, we planted the flag, we looked over our shoulder, and there were no Soviets. The primary objective was complete. The geopolitical point had been made. And almost as quickly as it all started, the political will and, more importantly, the money just evaporated. The race was over. We won. So, we went home. And that brings us to the really telling part of this whole story, the 50-year pause. I mean, think about it. If we were truly there just to explore, why on earth did we stop for half a century? The decades of silence that followed Apollo, well, they speak volumes. Just let that sink in. The last time a human being set foot on the moon was 1972. 1972. We didn't go back in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. For over 50 years, the moon was just left alone. If science was really the main driver, that long pause makes absolutely no sense. And here's the kicker. This little factoid really drives the point home. Across all 9 Apollo missions that went to the moon with 6 successful landings, how many professional scientists actually got to walk on its surface? 1. Just 1. And he was on the very last flight. This wasn't a scientific expedition at its core. It was geopolitical muscle flexing, pure and simple. So, after 50 years of nothing, what changed? What finally lit a fire under Congress to write those massive checks again? Well, just like last time, a new competitor showed up on the scene. And then, suddenly, everything changed. The moment China made it crystal clear they had serious plans for the moon, the entire conversation in Washington shifted practically overnight. The thought of Chinese taikonauts planting their flag on the moon, that was the catalyst. That was what it took to make a return to the moon a national priority again. So it's kind of like déjà vu, right? We're seeing the exact same pattern play out, but with a really, really critical difference. The adversary has changed, sure, from the Soviet Union to China. But more importantly, the goal has evolved. It's not just about planting a flag anymore. This time, it's about securing a foothold to control incredibly valuable lunar resources. And boom, just like that, the Artemis program was born. I mean, the name itself is brilliant symbolism. In Greek mythology, Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo. And this new program, it started under the Trump administration and has been fully embraced and continued by the Biden administration. It just goes to show you that, just like in the 60s, nothing unites Washington like a good old-fashioned space race. And just like with Apollo, they're not trying to do it all at once. It's a smart, step-by-step approach. Artemis I was that amazing, successful uncrewed test flight. Artemis II is going to fly a crew around the moon and bring them back. And after that, a future mission, Artemis IV, is slated to finally land astronauts at a very specific, very strategic location, the lunar South Pole. So why the laser focus on the South Pole? Because that's where the new prize is. This isn't about bragging rights or bringing back cool rocks anymore. This time, it's about water. Okay, check this out. At the moon's poles, there are these craters so incredibly deep that sunlight has never ever hit the bottom. We're talking billions of years in total darkness. They're basically cold traps. So when icy comets have slammed into the moon over the eons, water molecules settled in these super cold craters and froze solid, creating these vast, ancient reserves of water ice. And this water, it is an absolute game changer. For one, you can drink it, which is obviously pretty useful for a moon base, but much more importantly, you can use electricity to split that water into hydrogen and oxygen, which just happen to be the two main components of rocket fuel. The moon could literally become a cosmic gas station, a watering hole to refuel missions heading to Mars and deep into the solar system. It is the ultimate strategic high ground. And you better believe we're not the only ones who figured this out. The United States, China, Russia, they are all aiming their missions right at the South Pole. It's becoming a very crowded neighborhood very fast. It's a modern-day land rush, and if there's ever going to be a turf war on the moon, it's going to be right there. I mean, this competition has gotten so formalized that we now have literally two competing international agreements for how to behave in space. On one side, you've got the US-led Artemis Accords, which dozens of countries have signed. And on the other, China and Russia have created their own pact for a joint lunar base. We literally have two different rulebooks for operating on the moon. So when you step back and look at the whole picture, it brings us right back to that central theme. From racing the Soviets in the 60s to racing China for water today, it really seems like our greatest leaps forward aren't fueled by pure curiosity but by earthly competition. And it raises this really fascinating question about what it truly takes to push humanity to do incredible things. And that leaves us right here with this one big, ultimate question. This watering hole at the lunar South Pole is a perfect test. Instead of all working together, we're already drawing lines in the lunar dust. So as we reach for the stars once again, you have to ask, will the moon be our next great frontier for cooperation, or will it become our next battleground? All right, let's talk about the moon. After basically ignoring it for half a century, suddenly everyone is in a mad dash to get back. But the real story here isn't just about rockets and astronauts. It's about why we're going. And it turns out our reasons haven't changed as much as you'd think. I mean, think about it. It's one of the biggest achievements in human history, right? We put people on the moon and then crickets. For 50 years, humanity just stopped. Why? Why would we accomplish something so incredible and then just walk away? And that brings us to the second big question, why now? What flipped the switch? Well, the answer to why we stopped and why we're starting again is actually the exact same. It all comes down to having a powerful rival pushing us to go. So to really understand what's happening today, we've got to rewind the clock. Let's go back to the first space race, which, let's be honest, had a lot less to do with science and a whole lot more to do with the Cold War. You know the story we all love to tell ourselves. We went to the moon because it's who we are. We're explorers. It's in our DNA. We climb the mountain because it's there. And while that sounds really nice and noble, it's not exactly the real story. The real story is always about money. And you don't get Congress to sign off on a program that costs billions and billions of dollars just for the sake of exploration. No, to get that kind of cash, you need something to scare them. You need a spook. And boy, did America have one. The Soviet Union. You have to remember, in the late 50s and early 60s, the Soviets were just running circles around the US in space. They put the first animal up, the first probe to actually hit the moon, and then the big one, Yuri Gagarin, the first human being to orbit the Earth. For the US, this was terrifying. And that's when President Kennedy laid it all out. Just 6 weeks after Gagarin's historic flight, he stood up and basically said, this isn't about space, this is about freedom versus tyranny. Going to the moon was framed as a battle for the soul of the planet. So the mission wasn't to explore, it wasn't to set up a base. It was simple. Beat the Russians to the moon. That's it. So once Neil Armstrong took that one small step, the US kind of looked around, saw no Soviet flag, and said, all right, job's done. We won. The race was over. And what happened when that race was over? This. 50 years. A full half-century since a human being has walked on the lunar surface. As soon as the political reason to be there disappeared, so did the funding. And so did we. Okay, so let's fast forward through those 5 decades. Nothing's happening, it's quiet, and then, suddenly, there's a new spook, a new rival. And this time, the race isn't just to get to the moon. It's a scramble for a very specific spot, the South Pole. And who is this new spook? China. In the 2010s, China started making some serious moves, and then made it official. They were planning to put their own astronauts, or taikonauts, on the moon. And wouldn't you know it, that was all it took to get Washington interested in writing those big checks again. And that brings us to Artemis. That's the name of NASA's new lunar program. And the name is just perfect, right? In Greek mythology, Artemis is the goddess of the moon and the twin sister of Apollo. It's such a clever nod to the past, acknowledging that this is a new generation, a new mission. And they're doing it the same way they did with Apollo, step by step. First, Artemis 1 was a successful uncrewed test flight. Next up is Artemis 2, which will fly astronauts around the moon. And then, the main event. Missions like Artemis 4 will finally land humans back on the surface, right at the lunar South Pole. So what's so special about the South Pole? Well, this is where the new space race is totally different from the old one. This time, the prize isn't just about planting a flag and getting bragging rights. It's about something much more valuable, something you can actually use. Here's the difference in a nutshell. Apollo was all about prestige. It was a symbolic victory. Artemis, though, is about strategic resources. This isn't just a race to prove a point. It's a race to claim a very real, very tangible asset. And what is that asset? Water ice. Yeah, water. See, for billions of years, comets have been slamming into the moon, and they left behind water molecules. Down at the South Pole, there are these craters that are permanently in shadow. They're called cold traps, and the water in there has been frozen solid for eons. So why is frozen water such a big deal? Well, you can obviously use it for drinking water and to make breathable air for a moon base. But here's the real game changer. You can split water into hydrogen and oxygen, and that's literally rocket fuel. The moon could become a gas station in space, a jumping-off point for missions to Mars and beyond. But whenever you have a valuable resource that everybody wants, things start to get complicated. We're not just talking about exploration anymore. Now we're talking about who owns what, who gets access, and what the rules are on this brand new frontier. Someone put it perfectly. This is the oldest story in the book. It's the watering hole problem. You have different groups, all needing the same vital resource. The only difference is, this time, it's happening on the freaking moon. And you can already see the new dividing lines being drawn. On one side, you have the Artemis Accords, which is a US-led group of over 50 nations all agreeing to a cooperative framework. And on the other side, you've got China and Russia, who have formed their own partnership. The teams are picking sides for the future of the moon. So let's just step back and put a bow on all of this. What does it all mean? Well, we are absolutely going back to the moon, but everything about the mission feels different, and yet strangely the same. Here's the bottom line. The rival isn't the Soviet Union anymore, it's China. The prize isn't just prestige, it's water ice. But the core motivation, the thing that actually gets us to spend the money and take the risks, that's still the same old-fashioned competition between global powers, right here on Earth. But there is one interesting little twist to all of this. NASA's infrastructure, its centers, its contractors, they're spread all over the country, in both red states and blue states. Because of that, a big program like Artemis actually gets bipartisan support. It was started by one administration, and the next one kept it going full steam ahead. It's become something bigger than day-to-day politics. And that leaves us with one final big question to think about. Pushing the boundaries of exploration is one of the best things we do as a species, but it seems like every time we reach for the stars, we can't help but pack our earthly baggage, our rivalries, our conflicts, and take it all with us. Is that just our destiny?
All right, let's talk about why we're really going back to the moon after all this time.
It's a great question, and you might be surprised that the answer today is a lot like the answer back then.
Yeah, it's been over 50 years since a human has set foot on another world.
Remember the Apollo program? We were told it was about exploration, but that wasn't the whole story.
Kennedy himself laid it out. This wasn't just about science, it was a Cold War power play. See, the Soviet Union was winning the space race, hitting every milestone first. The US had to respond.
So we landed on the moon, beat the Soviets to it, and then we just stopped going.
So what's different now? The core motivation is actually very similar, but with a brand new twist.
Things really kicked off again when China announced its own moon mission. That definitely got Congress's attention.
And that brings us to the Artemis program. This time, it's about way more than just flags and footprints. The new race is to a very specific place, for a very specific resource, water ice.
Because if you can mine that water, you can make rocket fuel. The moon literally becomes a gas station.
Suddenly, the moon's south pole is prime real estate, and it requires some serious new tech.
First up, let's talk rockets. The classic Saturn V is out, the new SLS is in.
This thing is an absolute beast. It's the most powerful rocket ever built, thanks to those solid boosters.
And it's not just the rockets that have changed. The crew capsules themselves got a huge upgrade.
The new Orion capsule carries more astronauts and, crucially, protects them from dangerous deep space radiation. This new rivalry isn't just about tech. There are now basically two competing sets of rules for space. Which leaves us with a massive question. Will these resources lead to cooperation or to conflict?